Joining us now is the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartledge. It's great to have him on the programme. Thanks for being here. So is this the right move by the Defence Secretary?
Well, I became Shadow Defence Secretary after the election, and in the King's Speech debate in July, I specifically warned that if the government did not urgently set out a pathway to 2.5%, they would have to make cuts immediately. That's what I predicted, and this is what's come true today. So I'm very disappointed because, as you rightly said, as you've said throughout the programme today, doesn't it seem an extraordinary time to be making these cuts when the world is self-evidently getting more dangerous and the threats to our country have grown?
I guess what other people would say is, look, this is the right move because, frankly, this system is out of date. It needs modernising. And, it's not just the Defence Secretary, John Healey, saying that. Here's, James Heapy, the former Conservative Defence Minister. He said it's not necessarily the end of the world. Creating headroom to invest in new tech is vital.
So if you look at Ukraine, one of the big lessons from Ukraine is that actually you have to get all the kit you've got if you're going to fight. And the thing that's so important now is...
But you have to make decisions in defence and priorities. And this is not just like, you spend this money on this equipment and then that's it, it's done. There's costs for upkeep. That money could be better used, some would argue, on new technology that is better suited to modern warfare.
But the problem will be, having been in the Ministry of Defence, because I had the procurement job, I was very involved in the budget planning and so on. I knew that if we didn't put in more funding, you would have these sorts of pressures. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. When Putin invaded Ukraine, massive spike in inflation, the whole world trying to buy military equipment, so the forward cost of what we call the equipment plan, that was the military plan for future spending, has gone up. So there's more pressure. That's why we needed to set that plan for 2.5% immediately, not wait for a defence review. Frankly, I think the Secretary of State knows that. And so we've got this delay on the extra spending, and in the interim, the gap is having to be filled by these sorts of decisions. If you take the example of the landing docks, which are used to deploy the Royal Marines, we've had this announcement on Bulwark and Albion. I said in the Chamber today that I was assured if they were held in what we call extended readiness, if the balloon went up, i.e. war fighting scenario, and they were the thing that was needed, they could be used.
Will you acknowledge that part of the reason that we're in the situation we are is because of underinvestment under the Conservative Party as well? I'm just going to read you what Ben Wallace, the former Conservative Defence Secretary, said last year in a very frank exchange. He said the military had been hollowed out by years of underfunding, in which he included the Conservatives. Do you acknowledge that?
Yeah, and John Healey referred to that today, although... Ben was clear, but just for the record, Ben was referring to successive governments, so yes, that includes Conservatives. Yeah. But the numbers speak for themselves, right? Since 1989, when the Cold War finished, defence spending has fallen pretty much year on year.
So you acknowledge that you agree then with Ben Wallace that under the Conservative government, and I know you're talking about others as well, but under the last Conservative government, defence spending was hollowed out?
I still think we can be very proud of our record. I mean, particularly, of course, in supporting Ukraine. The most recent NATO exercise, the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War... Did you spend enough money on defence? Well, you judge it by the outcomes, don't you? The largest NATO exercise since the Cold War, Steadfast Defender, we had the largest number of personnel, 20,000 personnel in that exercise. If we fight with NATO. And so it's incredibly important to stress our armed forces are still among the world's best. But yes, there are challenges. And I've just said it, and I'll say it again, there was massive pressure on the defence budget from inflation. So that's why we set out a funded plan to get to 2.5% in April.
I'm not really sure what your answer to the question is about whether or not you spent enough on defence during the last Conservative government.
What I said was defence spending has fallen successively since the Cold War, under Labour, under Conservative. So I'm being completely clear with you. Yes, defence spending fell under the Conservatives. And
that was a mistake, you think?
Well, in 2010, we had a country where the previous government left a note there was no money left. The country was on the verge of bankruptcy.
Was it a mistake?
No, it wasn't, because the national interest then was to get our finances straight. But once we got them straight, the biggest increase in defence spending since the Cold War was under Rishi Sunak in 2019, and we had a funded plan for 2.5%. The fact the government have delayed their plan is why they're having to make these cuts.
I want to talk to you about UK-built missiles being fired into Ukraine. Into Russia by Ukraine for the first time. Yeah. Is that something you're comfortable with?
So, as you'll appreciate, I did ask this of John Healey. I raised a point of order after his statement on the defence cuts, and I asked about this, and he said that they will not comment on the operation. So we can't know for certain that is the case. Obviously, it's been There have been reports in the media, and I accept that. So our position is we wanted the government to grant Ukraine full autonomy, but it's clear, and I think this will continue, the government, and I have some sympathy as a former Defence Minister, they're not going to give you confirmation or do a sort of running commentary on the operational side.
I understand, but in principle, you are comfortable with the idea of UK-built equipment being used by Ukraine to fire into Russia?
Yeah, on Monday we called for this. I mean, we've been very clear on that.
What do you think a Donald Trump presidency will mean for the war? He obviously, in the campaign, said he was going to end it in 24 hours if he became president.
I think there's been a massive development, and the appearance of 10,000 North Korean troops is hugely significant strategically. I think, in the Pentagon, throughout the US political system, I'm sure they'll be watching that and thinking, hold on a minute, this is a major escalation. And just imagine how Russia would feel if there were suddenly 10,000 NATO troops facing them. And North Korea has many, many more. So I think, perhaps this is changing views in the US. I certainly hope that is the case. And I would also say in terms of Donald Trump, he will be keenly aware, I'm sure, that we don't want to show potential adversaries, including other major powers, that we are weak. We want to show that we're united. And I'm pleased that the US remains strong in its support for Ukraine, and I obviously hope that continues, under Donald Trump's administration.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme today.